and we'll... Hello and greetings everyone. I want to welcome you very warmly to this primary source online seminar on Mongol history and its influence in China, with particular attention to the life stories of some remarkable women, especially Sorghaghtani Beki, the mother of Kublai Khan. And we are truly delighted to have as our presenter and teacher this evening the renowned historian Morris Rosabi. Welcome, Professor Rosabi. It's really an honor for us to work with you and to have you with us tonight.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much.
I'm sorry?
Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I say it's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm always delighted to talk about the Mongols.
I wonder why. A lifetime of work. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to be introducing Professor Rosabi more formally in just a few moments, but let me first say that I am Susan Zeiger, and it's my delight to be a program director here at Primary Source. The webinar this evening is part of a three-part series this fall, in which we'll analyze a trio of diverse figures in world history from 1200 to 1600 CE. Well, actually, that's not right. I should say it's a quartet of figures, because our third session is a pairing of two fascinating female leaders. Let me advance the slides. I forgot to do that. So we were drawn to this topic for several different reasons. One is the trend toward using exciting nonfiction texts of all kinds in the world history classroom, a move that we applaud. As well, we at Primary Source think about biography and autobiography as powerful, relatable ways to bring the distant past and people to life for students. So we invited three renowned world historians and biographers to help us explore this semester what a single eventful life can tell us about deep and broad themes in the making of our global world, including, of course, many of the core themes of AP World History, which I know that many of you teach. I should add that all three of our scholars are deeply involved in world history education, and they're excited to work with an online community of teachers with a passion for global history. This seminar is our kickoff event for the series, Biographical Portraits as a World History Lens. And we have our second session coming up on November 8th. We'll have Professor Ross Dunn with us from San Diego State University, speaking on Ibn Battuta, his area of specialty. And I think we're tickled to have Ross with us on the webinar tonight as a listener and participant. So thank you so much for joining us, Ross, and we're really excited to study with you in early November. And then we'll finish the season on December 5th with Professor Mary Wiesner-Hanks, comparing the life stories and rulerships of Elizabeth, Queen of England, and Queen Aminatu, an early ruler of a West African kingdom. If you miss any of these fascinating sessions, you'll be able to find each of the webinars after the fact as a recording on our YouTube channel, the Primary Source YouTube station, where we have a large and growing collection of scholar and teacher presentations on world history and global studies. And I'll say a little bit more about that later tonight. As soon as the recording from this session is ready later this week, we'll email you the link, so you'll be getting it right away, and all of the sources and references that we mentioned tonight can be found in the slides. I also want to welcome all of you who signed up and are joining us from different parts of the country, a few of you perhaps from outside the country, and thank you for making the time to be with us this evening. Later on tonight, we'll have a designated block of time for your questions and comments, but we do encourage you to begin entering whatever interesting thoughts or questions that occur to you as soon as they do. So you can do that using the chat box in the lower left of your computer screen. It looks like a little instant messenger screen, and you just push enter after you type your comment, and it will post for us to see. We'd love to know what drew you to the webinar this evening and what classroom connections you're excited to make. toward the end of our session, I'll share some high-quality classroom resources that Primary Source has curated in conjunction with this session. And this slide is also reminding me to say one more thing, that you can now receive professional development hours by taking part in all 3 of these sessions when we send you a notification later this week with the webinar recording. We will send you the directions for posting your responses to the webinar, and again, we'll resend the interesting reading by Professor Rosabi that we distributed before the seminar tonight. But we'll send that again so you have it handy. Now, a word about our organization. Primary Source is a nonprofit organization that partners with educators to bring global and cultural awareness into K-12 classrooms and schools, and thereby advance global education. We're almost 30 years old these days. The heart of our work is professional development that's carried out in multiple formats: face-to-face courses, online courses of varying lengths, study tours, and book discussion groups. We're a resource center for global education. We do curriculum development and school consulting as well. We welcome you to join us and learn more about our work, and I'll close out this evening by sharing some easy ways for you to do that. And now I'd like to turn our attention to our webinar topic this evening and to our distinguished presenter. Professor Rosabi is an eminent historian of China and Central and Inner Asia. It's really almost impossible to overstate his impact on the field of Mongol history, although he's a very modest man, so he probably is embarrassed that I said that, but it's true. He's the author of the 2 titles listed here. More about those later in the hour: his Kublai Khan biography and The Mongols and Global History, which is a wonderful collection of documents. Professor Rosabi had a long teaching career at Queens College, City University of New York, and has more recently taught courses on Inner Asian, East Asian, and Chinese history at Columbia University. Apropos of our live online seminar topic tonight, I'll also mention that Professor Rosabi has been interested in global women's history since the very early years of that field. As you, our participants know, if you got to read his fascinating essay from the late 1970s, Kublai Khan and the Women in His Family, which Primary Source sent out last week, and as I said, we'll resend in our follow-up email later this week. Morris has helped organize exhibitions at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Cleveland Museum of Art, the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco, and he's created a curriculum website on Mongol history with Asia for educators. He's traveled repeatedly to Central Asia and Mongolia, where he teaches courses on Mongolian and East Asian history. He and Mary Rosabi have been collaborating on a major oral history of 20th and 21st century Mongolia, and for all of this work, he received an honorary doctorate from the National University of Mongolia. And I think that's the occasion for the delightful photo where, Morris, you look a little bit like a Christmas elf, as you and I discussed. We are so excited to hear your remarks. Would you like to turn on your sound and begin? I'll tell you that we can hear you as you're getting started.
Well, thank you very much, Susan. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, you sound great, and we're looking forward to your talk. Thank you so much again.
Great. Well, let me start by saying I really enjoy talking about the Mongols, and in particular talking to a wide variety of non-experts in this field, because there's been so much written about it, and I hope tonight I'll try to dispel some of the myths surrounding the Mongols, and in particular their importance in terms of world history. It's very easy to sort of think of the Mongols in the conventional way, and that is that they were somehow pillagers, plunderers, murderers, and so on. And that was the image, really, that the Mongols had until the 1980s. And there is some truth to that. One cannot ignore the fact that they massacred large numbers of people, that they destroyed some areas or damaged some areas quite considerably. probably some of the sources exaggerate the damage that they wrought, but in fact there was some killing and plundering. But there is another side to the Mongols, and in the 1980s, a couple of Mongol scholars, all two of them, decided to try to rectify the image and try to point out the positive features of the Mongol Empire and Mongol history. Then, as so often happens, 10 or 15 years later, it became sort of vulgarized, and popular writers began to describe the Mongols as democrats, as believers in international law, and so on and so forth. It goes way beyond the facts and doesn't relate to what the Mongols actually did. What I hope to do tonight is to focus on what they actually did. And in order to do that, one has to go to some images. And here's the outline that you might want to look at of my talk tonight. But let me start with images. The first image of Mongolia today, it doesn't look big on the map, but actually Mongolia is about 4 times the size of France. And with a population today of about 3 million people, it is the least densely populated country in the world. And that tells you something basic about the Mongols. The real success of Genghis Khan, the founder of the Mongol Empire, was the fact that he was able to unite these disparate peoples that are spread out all along the steppe lands, in the desert, in the forests of Mongolia for the first time really in history. And what he did, what he started with, was to build the largest contiguous land empire in world history, as you can see in this second map. Actually, he was not a great conqueror. Most of the territory that was brought under Mongol control was actually brought under the control by his sons and grandsons. He is portrayed as this great conqueror and so on, an innovator in military and strategy and so on. He really wasn't. Most of the techniques that he and his successors used were traditional nomadic techniques of shooting of the bow and arrow, a powerful cavalry, all sorts of tactics and strategy to fool the enemy into believing that they were a larger force and so on. He developed none of that. And in fact, he hardly campaigned in any way to obtain territory. His 3 campaigns basically were against northern China over here, against the Tangut Khanate over here in the northwest. He did not conquer those territories. He simply defeated those people and then moved towards Central Asia. That area he did conquer in the period of 1219 to 1225. He then headed back to the northwest in 1225 and died right around here in 1227. He died of natural causes. There was nothing is known about what actually caused his death. He probably died of old age. But just to show you something about how these myths develop, about 10 years ago, a guy from NPR contacted me and asked me to talk about Genghis Khan. And we met at a local coffee house, and we started talking to him for about an hour and a half. And he said, well, is there anything sort of unique and colorful about Genghis Khan's death? And I said, well, you know, there's this crazy story that a woman that he had taken from one of the tribes did not want to be taken by him, and she puts a knife in her vagina, and as he's having sex, she kills him. That was the only thing he put on the radio of my 1.5 hour speech with him. In any case, Genghis probably died of really of old age. His successors, and his most prominent successor, was Kublai Khan. let me get an image of what the Mongols really are famous for, and that is their ability to move from one location to another. They put up these gers, G-E-R-S, in about 45 minutes, dismantle them in 45 minutes, and that's the story of the Mongols, migration. They moved from place to place, and everybody in the family was quite important in these moves. Women, girls, boys, men, all had to play an important role in an environment that was very fragile and very demanding. Mongolia can have winters that reach about 50 to 75 degrees below zero. It's a very demanding and difficult kind of environment, and it's an environment that is not suitable for agriculture. You have a very short growing season before the cold sets in, and so the only thing that economically works in Mongolia is animal husbandry. Sheep, goats, yaks, horses, and camels are the 5 main animals that the Mongols used in their economy. And it's a very fragile kind of economy, and that, I think, explains why the Mongols erupted from Mongolia in the early 13th century. There appears to have been a series of terrible winters, terrible snow, and terrible cold from around 1180 to 1220, the height of the Mongols' expansion. And probably hundreds of thousands of animals died and did not get through the winter. The typical thing that happened is what the Mongols call a zud, Z-U-D. And that is, there's a lot of snow, and then suddenly there's a warming trend for a week or so. The snow begins to melt, and then again the cold sets in, and there is an ice covering that develops over the grassland, denying the animals the ability to get at the life-preserving grassland. What happens is, oftentimes, they try to break through the ice, and in fact, their teeth break, and they have to be destroyed. This probably is the scenario that led to the outbreak from Mongolia that was led by Genghis Khan. The most important animal for the Mongols is the horse, because that gives them an asset, an advantage over all other armies. They have a great cavalry, and the Mongols are practically born on the horse. You see them today, 2 or 3-year-old kids riding around bareback on a horse. And in fact, the major horse race in Mongolia is a race that occurs in July, and the race is about a 25-kilometer race for kids under the age of 8. It's incredible how skillful they are in terms of riding the horses. And of course, in traditional times, they not only were able to ride the horse, but they could shoot a bow and arrow very efficiently and effectively while riding at full speed. That's what made them a dominant fighting force. The person who took advantage of this originally was Genghis Khan. He's right here, receiving tribute from another group of Mongols. Eventually would receive tribute from others as well. He dies in 1227, and one of the things that happens is that there is a period of 30 or 40 years in which there are struggles for power. The Mongols never came up with a regular system of succession to the Khanate, to becoming the great emperor, so to speak, of the Mongols. And so starting in 1241, about 14 years after his death, there would be struggles for power among brothers, among cousins, among uncles and nephews, and so on, which weakened the Mongols. And the result was, of course, the final collapse of the Mongols. They never were truly defeated. They defeated themselves by their own fragmentation. one of the descendants of Genghis Khan, his grandson, Kublai Khan, is the one I want to focus on tonight. And in order to do that, you have to talk really about his mother, a woman named Sorghaghtani Beki, who was captured by Genghis Khan, given over to one of his sons, and was a woman who was illiterate. She had not even learned to read the developing Mongol script. She came from a relatively noble background of one of the Mongol tribes, but relatively uneducated at that time period. But she was a remarkable woman and is mentioned in sources around the world at that time. A Hebrew traveler describes her. The great Persian historian Rashid ad-Din describes her. European missionaries point out that she is the greatest, wisest woman in the world, according to the European missionaries at that time period. She must have been quite extraordinary. And she was ambitious. She wanted all four of her sons to become khans or leaders in the Mongol domains. And in fact, all four of them did become khans of various sections of the Mongol empire. She trained them to become great khans and great leaders. The first thing she did, she made sure that each of them was literate. So each of them could read and write the Mongol script that had developed under Genghis Khan. Each of them also was taught a different foreign language. Kublai, for example, was taught to speak Chinese. He never learned to read and write, but he could speak Chinese, and that gave him an advantage over many other Mongols who dealt with the Chinese, because eventually he would become the emperor of China in the 1260s, and that was to be his primary domain. She made sure one of the other sons learned Persian, because that particular son would be going further to the west. She made sure, secondly, that they understood that they ought not to exploit the local population. Instead of, for example, undermining the Chinese agricultural economy and turning the land, the agricultural land, into pasture, the kind of pasture that the Mongols were used to, instead of doing that, what she proposed and what she instructed her sons to do was basically to promote the life and the economy of the peasants rather than undermining them. And the idea was that there'd be greater agricultural production and everybody would benefit. Higher taxes would accrue to the Mongols, and the peasants would be happy under Mongol rule. Third thing, she was a Nestorian Christian, not a shaman or any of the other religions that had reached Mongolia over the centuries. Nestorianism was a heretical form of Christianity that was expelled from Europe in the 5th century AD, wound up in the Middle East, and then because the Nestorians were involved in trade, they traveled along the Silk Roads, reaching China around the 7th and 8th centuries AD, and then China sort of rejected Nestorianism, or didn't play a very important role in China, but it did play an important role among the nomads in north of China. Nestorianism, the difference between Nestorianism and the regular accepted form of Christianity was, first of all, the Nestorians could not conceive of an equal Trinity. They could not conceive of the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost being equal. They posited that the Father was really more superior to the Son and the Holy Ghost. Furthermore, they conceive of a divine and human Jesus in one form. They divided the human Jesus from the divine Jesus. And thirdly, they were upset at the important role that the Virgin Mary had been given by the Catholic Church, and so they tended to play her down as an important force. In any case, Sorghaghtani Beki was an historian, but she realized that if the Mongols were going to rule a multi-ethnic, multi-religious population, they had to adopt a policy of religious toleration. And she made a big show of supporting and providing funds for the building of mosques, for the building of Buddhist monasteries, the translation of Buddhist writings, and at the same time, a little attention also to the building of at least one Nestorian Christian church in China. We, unfortunately, for this powerful woman, this amazing woman, we don't have an image of her. There is no image that has survived into modern times. So you can't show your students this remarkable woman. She was also an adroit politician and was able to maneuver in such a way that by 1251, one of her sons, a man named Mongke, Mongke, became the Great Khan. He lasted for about 8 years, died in 1259, while initiating a campaign to take over all of China, wanted to take over the southern part of China. The Mongols had taken over the north, but anything south of the Yangtze River, the great Yangtze River, was still under the control of the Chinese. While on a campaign, he died, and at that point, his younger brother, Kublai Khan, comes into the picture. And this is a portrait of Kublai Khan right here. He's very simply dressed. It was taken right as he was about to become Emperor of China and Great Khan of the Mongols in 1260. It's an exact portrait from life. A simple tunic, looks sort of normal. That hat is very typical of Mongol hats of that time period. And Kublai was married to a rather remarkable woman, a woman named Chabi, who also would have a tremendous impact on the Mongols and on Mongol history. What needs to be pointed out about women is that they played such an important role in the economy of the Mongols. Everybody, as I said, every person had to play a role, had to work hard in order for the Mongols to survive when they were in Mongolia, in this difficult environment that they lived in. And because they played such an important, particularly economic role, they basically sheared the sheep, they took care of the animals, they milked the animals, they cooked, and they could actually take part in warfare. Genghis Khan's wife, Genghis Khan's daughter, actually was a military person, was involved in warfare. But most important, one Mongol scholar believes that one of the reasons the Mongols were so effective was that they could have total male mobilization into the military. The women could take care of the economy. The women could take care of the animals, freeing the men to take part in military campaigns. And so, because of their importance, Mongol women had more rights than women almost anywhere in the world. They had the right to own property, for example, which meant the right to own the animals. The right to access to pasture land was another feature of the rights of women. And they also had the right of divorce, which was quite unique in that time period. Now she's wearing, this is around 1260 also, she's wearing a much more elaborate dress than Kublai, her husband, did at that point. And she has this unique headdress, which Mongol women of that time period would wear. It's called a bogtach, B-O-G-T-A-C-H, B-O-G-T-A-G-H. And there is possibly an apocryphal story about this. The story goes that the women had played such an important role in some of the victories that the Mongols had won, that the Mongol men wanted to reward them. And they saw that women had no headdress at that time. So they designed a headdress for them as a reward, but they didn't want the women to be sort of swell-headed, and so they designed the headdress so that the boot of the headdress would mean that they would be under the heels of the men. Whether this is true or not, who knows? But certainly women played a very important role. Now here's a painting of Kublai Khan 20 years after he had taken power. And he's quite different. He's wearing an ermine coat and he's out on a hunt. This is actually taken, a real painting done in 1281 by a Chinese painter. He's much more elaborately dressed than he was, and he has obviously enjoyed Chinese food. Marco Polo tells us that by this time, Kublai had grown so obese that no single horse could sustain him. When he went out on a hunt or on a parade, he would have to be carried around on an elephant. And there is a very famous image in a Marco Polo text of Kublai being carried around on an elephant. Chabi was quite important at this time period in a number of ways. She toned down Kublai's desire for constant expansion in the 1260s and 1270s. And she pointed out that he needed to actually rule China rather than plundering the country. And she helped in setting up governmental institutions that the Chinese were used to in actually ruling at that time period. She insisted that Buddhism play an important role in China as well. She insisted that the Khan, her husband, persist in conducting the Confucian rituals, because after all, the vast majority of the population was Chinese. And so she helped in the process of ruling China during that time period. She also made Kublai aware of traitorous behavior on the part of his youngest brother, who sought to overthrow him in 1260, from 1260 to 1264, and facilitated Kublai's victory over his younger brother. His younger brother was defeated. Nothing was done to him. He wasn't executed. He was just kept at the court. She also made sure that Kublai would be portrayed in a different light in various cultures, so that he would be accepted in the various domains that he purportedly ruled. And for example, this is an example of how he tried to portray himself. Here he is in a Persian illustrated manuscript with his advisors, and he's no longer that kind of Oriental, figure any longer. He's in an Islamic setting, which makes him more palatable to the Islamic world. And of course, he was going to use quite a few Muslims in his attempt to rule China. Chabi was very important in pushing him to be accepted by a wide variety of religions, a wide variety of peoples in his empire, because he was ruling a multi-ethnic and multi-linguistic and multi-religious empire. Here he is in the West. He greeted Marco Polo's father and uncle, and by this time he looks like a typical European sage. This is a manuscript of Marco Polo's, but this fit in with what Chabi was trying to push, and that is being accepted by a wide variety of cultures in the world, and portraying yourself as supporting them, as supporting those cultures. Kublai Khan told Marco Polo's father and uncle that he wanted them to come back to Europe and bring 100 learned Christians who would help him convert the Chinese to Christianity. This is, of course, a fake. He had no such intention, but he wanted educated people from the West to help him set up a government. The other thing that you notice in this time period is that the Mongol, the chief importance, it seems to me, of the Mongols is bringing the world together, is uniting the world. There's a real global and Eurasian history from the Mongol invasions on. And you can see this most clearly in the art that is produced in both China and Iran and the Middle East. It's no accident that Marco Polo and Europeans for the first time reached China during the Mongol era. The Mongols, and Kublai Khan in particular, was supportive of trade and supportive of contact with among different cultures. Kublai, for example, had all sorts of medical problems, and they couldn't be resolved by the Chinese physicians. He had gout and other difficulties that developed as a result of his kind of luxurious lifestyle. And he heard that the Persians had a fantastic medical system. So he invited Persian doctors to come to China to set up a series of Persian hospitals, and as well to translate some Persian medical texts into Chinese. Same thing with astronomy. Obviously, people like the Mongols are dependent on climate, weather conditions, were fascinated by astronomy, and they recognized that the Persians had made a quantum leap forward in terms of astronomy. So he invited astronomers from Persia to build an observatory in Beijing, which still survives in Beijing. It's on the main street, Chang'an Street, not far from the Beijing Hotel and the other tourist sites. There's this observatory. It's been rebuilt and so on, but it's an indication of the desire of the Mongols to unite the world. And in the art, you can see this very quickly. In fact, I have to praise art historians, who recognized the importance of the Mongols when everybody else was portraying them as savage and brutal individuals. This is a celadon with 3 fish. Fish doesn't mean anything in Persian. In Chinese motifs, it means wealth and prosperity. And you'd think that this is a Chinese celadon. In fact, it's a Persian celadon. And if you go to the Metropolitan Museum, they have the original Chinese celadon, and right next to it is the Persian celadon. And you can tell the difference between the two. And you can tell that the Persians are imitative and not quite the same quality as the Chinese. But it's interesting that through the Mongols, via the Mongols, the artwork of China was reached Persia. Here's a Persian ceramic with a phoenix design, 3 phoenixes. And again, the phoenix never existed in Persia before the Mongol period. The phoenix represents the Chinese empress, is the symbol of the Chinese empress. And so the motif was transmitted by the Mongols to Persia from China. Very important in this process was Chabi. Chabi was a tremendous lover of beautiful ceramics, beautiful tile work, and one of her grandchildren actually was involved in starting the imperial palace collection of art. Again, tile work from the Mongol summer palace of Taht-i-Suleiman in Persia, the phoenix, which had never existed before in Persian art. The dragon, the quintessential Chinese motif. You find it again in tile work for the Taht-i-Suleiman summer palace. Another indication of the tremendous significance of the Mongols in transmitting culture and art from one region to another. This is a manuscript of Chinese, Nepalese housing. The housing is accurate. It's meant to illustrate the work, the first universal history by a Persian named Rashid ad-Din, one of the greatest historians ever to write. He started out, was born as a Jew, but converted to Islam. He saw no difference between the two religions from his standpoint, and was trained as a doctor, eventually became prime minister of Iran or Persia, and also was given the commission by one of the Khans to write a history of the Mongols. He started by writing a history of the Mongols, but then expanded it to the history of the Persians, then a history of the Islamic peoples, then a history of Europe known as the Franks, China, the Jews, India, the first really universal history ever written by anyone, and it was commissioned by the Mongols. In fact, one of the people who commissioned it was the wife of the Khan, another indication of the importance of women in the Mongol domains. And a lot of it motifs derive from Chinese landscape painting. These crenellated mountains can be found in any Song dynasty or Yuan dynasty painting. The form of the trees derives from Chinese painting as well. Finally, you will notice over here the two women, the two wives of the two Mongols on this side.
Morris, we can't see your pointer, by the way, so maybe you could just tell us visually on the screen where we should be looking. Verbally, I think down in the right-hand corner, is that the two figures?
No, it's in the left-hand corner is the two women. If you can see the hats.
Oh yes, the boot hats. Yes.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, I see. They can't see it too well. Okay. And on the right-hand side are the two brothers who were fighting it out to become Khans in 1329. And this fellow finally acceded and allowed his brother to become the Khan and the Emperor of China in 1329. And this textile was produced to commemorate that decision. And it's fascinating. It gives you everything imaginable in terms of the Mongols. Up here are a number of real identifiable Tibetan figures. So you have Tibet portrayed at the very top. At the very bottom, you have a series of Hindu figures. So you have Indian designs. The circle, these beads that are in the circle, are basically derived from Persian art. And so you have also this figure here, the Yamantaka, portrayed in a Chinese style. So you have Chinese, Tibetan, Indian, Persian, and this is what I think is the importance of the Mongols. They brought the world together, and here's a depiction of these two Mongol figures. This textile is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was bought in the 1980s, along with about 60 other textiles that were smuggled out of Tibet at that time period. They were divided up between the Cleveland Museum of Art and the Metropolitan Museum. And this is, of course, this particular textile is the center of all of those textiles. It's a huge. It doesn't look huge on in this image, but but it is substantial. They show it usually in the spring, and of course, color would light would have an impact on color, and so they don't show it throughout the year. But usually, in April, they do show it in the Chinese or sometimes in the South Asian collection. I would recommend a glance at it. This image doesn't do it justice. Okay, let me wind up and try to point out that what the Mongols did and what the Mongol women did, basically. They brought the world together. That's, I think, their greatest importance. They were believers in and supporters of trade, unlike the Chinese. The Chinese, in theory, thought of merchants as parasites. Merchants didn't produce anything, and so merchants were relegated to a relatively low social status, and there were all sorts of restrictions imposed on merchants. The Mongols changed all that. They facilitated the work of Mongols, building roads, bridges, using paper money on a wider scale, funding large-scale caravans, providing low-cost loans to merchants, all sorts of things to promote trade. And the result is the greatest cultural and artistic interactions in world history up until that time. In astronomy, in medicine, even in agriculture, in economic areas, entertainment, musical instruments were transmitted from one region to another. Conceptions of the role of women also were transmitted from one region to another, particularly in China. Mongol women did have an impact on the Chinese. So it's no accident that you find the first Chinese woman painter whose paintings have survived during this period. And a number of poets producing their poetry, women poets, during this time. It's no accident that happens. The Mongol example does have an impact on the Chinese. Let me stop here, and you can let me know what you want to ask about or
wonderful. Yes. Oh, Morris, thank you so much. That was just fascinating, and we certainly saw the globalization theme in this history so beautifully illustrated with the visuals and artwork you shared, and then the really fascinating role that Mongol women played in supporting this kind of outward-looking empire building and coming together of cultures, which is a great theme for world history classrooms. I want to say to our participants that you are absolutely welcome to put any thoughts or questions you have into the communication box, the chat box at the bottom of the screen. We've already had a number of questions that have come in, and I'll share those with you. But feel free to add any comments and questions that you had. Morris, one thing that a number of people were interested in was the images that you shared, and one of our teachers wanted to know a little bit more about the Marco Polo manuscript illustration. Do you know much about where that is or what its origin was?
Sure. That image is in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. The Bibliothèque Nationale has a number of images from, wait 1 second, let me try to get back here.
Sure.
Let me see if I can get back to that image. Let's see.
Yeah, keep going.
Keep going. There it is.
There it is.
You have quite a number. I chose just this one, but there's that wonderful elephant one that I mentioned, Kublai Khan riding an elephant, because that was the only animal that could sustain his weight, and quite a number of others. There are a couple in the British Museum, but I would say the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris is the one that really has the best collection of these.
Great.
There's no image. Unfortunately, there's no image of Marco himself, except one that people refer to. That there's nothing of him meeting Kublai Khan or anything like that, unfortunately. And unfortunately, as I said, there's no image of Kublai Khan's mother. Really sad.
Yeah, that's a shame. One of our participants asked if there was any evidence that Chabi and Sorghaghtani Beki, so there would be mother and daughter, the mother-in-law, daughter-in-law, whether they perhaps knew each other or had influenced each other. They seem, as Deb points out, to be progressive and unusual women, or maybe that wasn't really unusual in terms of the inner workings of the culture.
No, they were quite unusual women. The mother chose Chabi as his wife. And so they must have, we don't know much more than that. I mean, we don't know why she did so. We don't know much about the original context, but we do know that the mother was instrumental in introducing Chabi and in choosing her for her son. She also chose a Nestorian Christian for Kublai's brother, who was the one who conquered Persia. And a few years before Kublai took power, a woman who did play also a very important role. I didn't mention her because she played a role in the Middle East, quite an important role in trying to initiate an alliance with the Byzantine Empire and then with Europe against the Muslims in the Middle East. She played a very important role. There hasn't been much written about her, but I hope at some point in the next year or two that I'll write a short article about her.
Oh, terrific, terrific. Well, staying with that topic of Christianity, Kathy Lobo has asked about the presence of Christianity in Mongolia today, and particularly whether Nestorianism has survived in some form. I really knew very, very little about that religious tradition, so that was so fascinating for me. But what can you tell us about Christian influence in that region now?
At the present time, no, Nestorianism did not survive among the Mongols. When they went back to Mongolia, they eventually converted to Tibetan Buddhism in the 16th century, and Buddhism remained the dominant kind of religion until the early 20th century, when Mongolia turned to socialism and communism, and that changed the picture dramatically. Since 1990, with socialism having been undercut and a different kind of system established, there are quite a few missionaries, Christian missionaries in Mongolia, Mormons in the cities, but a lot of fundamentalist Christian religious groups have reached Mongolia. They have somewhat antagonized some of the Mongolian Buddhists, and it'll be interesting to see what kind of relationship they established. Some of them came in as educators and did not point out that they were, missionaries, so that if they had stated baldly that they were coming in as Christian missionaries, it would have been a different ball game, but in fact they tried to portray themselves as teachers and educators, and that didn't help in terms of the Mongol image of Christianity. But there are quite a few Mormons. I've attended a number of Mormon meetings. As it turns out, 90% of the people there were women. Very few Mongol men have turned to Mormonism. And presumably also very few have turned to Christianity. It's mostly women who played an important role.
That makes me curious, Morris, if you see much of that continuing legacy of egalitarianism and gender relations that you describe. Now, I know we're talking about 1,000 years ago, but in terms of contemporary gender structures and relationships in Mongolia?
Absolutely. Just to give you one statistic, about 75 to 80% of the college students are women.
Huh.
And as time goes on, they'll be playing a more and more important role in the professions, in the government. A woman has been, two women actually have been ministers of foreign affairs. None has been prime minister yet over the past 20 years, 27 years, but they've been in the cabinet, they're in the parliament, and they really do hold up the sky. The women do hold up the sky there. The men have, there's a serious alcohol problem at the moment, and it's mostly among men. The women are truly remarkable. I've met some extraordinary women in Mongolia over the past 27 years that I've been going. Well, actually, 40 years that I've been going to Mongolia. They are the dominant group in terms of medicine, education, university level, in practically every area. They're the ones who serve as interpreters, translators. One of women owns the largest petroleum producing company in Mongolia. All sorts of things. So they're, as the men, it does present a problem because the men are not as well educated as the women, and it'll be more and more of a problem as time goes on. What's happened is that a real social problem, basically, since some of the men are alcoholics or have difficulties with alcohol. The women will have a child, but will not necessarily live with the man. So it's a problem.
Wow, that's fascinating.
The women are amazing.
I think we want to stay with that question of gender history for a moment. A number of participants have been interested in and asking about that. I really loved your article, Kublai Khan and the Women in His Family, which we assigned to our participants as background reading. That was so intriguing to read, and I see that as a pioneering effort on your part to interpret women's history more broadly, not just that of the history of elites, but really looking at women in general. I personally was very inspired by the concept of a civilization where no clothes or dishes ever needed to be washed. I thought that was a good form of liberation for women. But I wondered if you can tell us, Morris, if there are young scholars today working on this topic. Have there been some important discoveries or new sources to look at for understanding gender relations in Mongolian history? Is that a growing field, or is there really not that much more that we'll be able to know about it going back into this period of the Mongol Empire?
Well, there's actually been quite a number of articles since that time, and books actually. Mine was really among the first to mention the gender issues, but Bettine Burge of the University of Southern California has done a study of the Mongol influence on Chinese law with regard to women.
Oh.
She cites the whole book is a translation of cases. It's a fascinating book because it's high school, even secondary school students would find it fascinating to look at some of the cases because they're practical and they show the impact of the Mongols on Chinese law, freeing up Chinese women in many ways and providing them with rights which they had not had in the past. Of course, you can say that these might be an exception, but the number of such cases that Bettine has found does reveal that Chinese women were influenced by the relative freedom and flexibility of Mongolian women. In Persia, there's just been a new book by a man named Bruno Nicola about the role of women in Iran, and that too it indicates that women played a very important role, and that the Mongols influenced Persian and Islamic law during that time period. It didn't last forever, but during the Mongol reign, the Mongol rule, the were significant impacts on the role and the status of Persian women.
Oh, that's great. You anticipated exactly Corinne's question there, whether the Mongol rule in China changed Mongol gender relations. So that's just great to have that answer. And Morris, if you give me the name of the historian who's done that work, and we can look at some of those cases, I'll share that with our participants after the webinar is over. That would be great to know.
I'll send them to you in an email.
Terrific. Okay, great. Thank you for that. Fascinating. We had another question here from Angela. Angela asked, how did the Mongols resolve the image of their being brutal conquerors with being the actuality of their being supporters and patrons of culture, trade, and art? Was there much awareness? Do we know that they perceived that they were seen in this brutal way, or did that interpretation really fall into place in centuries much later?
No. At the time, there was some Chinese and some Iranians who quite well understood the role of the Mongols in terms of promoting artistic context, cultural context, and their love of beauty. I've written an article about it. I can send you in a book put out by the University of Hawaii Press about the Mongols' role in transmitting motifs and so on, and their role actually in developing blue and white porcelain. We think of blue and white porcelain as the Ming Dynasty. Actually, the first blue and white porcelains were of the Mongol era. They recognized that in the Middle East, the Islamic world loved the color blue, and so they transmitted that message to Chinese potters, and Chinese potters began experimenting and producing this blue and white porcelain. They were great lovers of beautiful textiles, and the reason for that is, of course, textiles are very easy to transport. They're not heavy, and so textiles underwent a renaissance during the Mongol period in all areas, from China to Persia to Russia. And in fact, the Metropolitan put on a spectacular show called When Silk Was Gold, of the textiles produced mostly in the Mongol era. And they were obviously, the Mongols were not the weavers, they were the patrons and the consumers. And the Chinese recognized this. Painting as well, the greatest painter of the Chinese dynasty, the Yuan dynasty, was a man named Zhao Mengfu. And his work was subsidized by the Mongols. So people knew that the Mongols loved beautiful objects, and Zhao Mengfu produced, he knew who his patrons were, so he produced a lot of animal paintings. He produced a very famous sheep and goat painting that's in the Freer Gallery of Art down in Washington. Produced a horse painting.
Pastoralist, art for pastoralists.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a good strategy for an artist. It's a great story. Morris, there's something I would love to pursue with you myself. You are a wonderful nonfiction writer, in my opinion, and in your biography of Kublai Khan, you include wonderful biographical portraits of other personalities and characters of the era, including the women that you've been introducing us to this evening. One person that your book really brought to life for me was Kublai Khan's wife, Chabi, about whom you spoke this evening so eloquently too. I picked out a passage that I thought in a way encapsulated your craft as a storyteller and a biographer. Do you mind if I share this passage? And then I'd like to ask you just to talk us through your writing process, and if you enjoy the art of writing, and if you try to have any kind of particular impact when you are writing. So here you write, Chabi was the ideal helpmate of Kublai's effort to rule China. She aspired to be the empress of a powerful state, not simply the wife of a tribal chieftain. She had wide-ranging interests and was not limited by Mongol pastoral traditions. In the early years of Kublai's reign, for example, four members of the imperial guard proposed that the areas around his capital be turned into pasture land for the Mongol horses. This proposal fit with the traditional Mongol economy, but it made little sense to the agrarian economy of North China. Chabi sensed the folly of the proposal and objected violently. Kublai quickly rejected the proposal based on her reaction. The Mongol nobles were thus not permitted to encroach on the agricultural land of the Chinese peasants who lived around the capital. So again, that's from your biography. Can you say anything about either that passage specifically or in general about how you like to approach biographical writing and the art of biography writing and maybe some of its challenges?
Well, the challenges are that we cannot write a biography in the same way that you can write a biography of Peter the Great, for example, or Catherine of Aragon. The sources tend to emphasize the bureaucratic role of Chinese and Mongol Khans. That is really difficult. In order to get colorful information, you have to dig deeply. In order to make the person appear as an individual rather than as a stereotypical Chinese emperor is very, very hard. One of the ways in which it can be done in this period is there were a lot of foreigners who came to China and wrote accounts that provide the kind of color that you don't find in the Chinese sources. So Marco Polo, the other European missionaries who came to China, Rashid Adi, the great Persian historian, was a man who focused on individuals and not just merely on stereotypes. So that helps a great deal in terms of providing a real picture of individuals. But it's very hard. I've got to admit, it took me years to come up with that kind of basic information that was not stereotypical.
Did you come to like? Yeah, go ahead.
The Chinese sources make it very difficult to sort of portray a ruler as a human being. And that's the case really up until the 17th or 18th centuries. One of the people who was able to do it very well was Jonathan Spence, professor at Yale for many years, retired some years ago. He was able to get a picture of Kangxi, the great emperor of the 17th century. But again, it's very difficult. Chinese sources don't want you to know what a real human being. They want to portray him as a kind of divinity. And so if you portray him as a real human being, it's going to be very hard to maintain that image of the ruler as a divine figure, as a son of heaven.
That's such a fascinating cultural difference, and that really explains a lot. Thank you for sharing that. That sounds like it was a big challenge in the task of trying to write a biography, but you did somehow manage to do that so beautifully and compellingly in your book. Morris, I want to take just a moment or two, switch gears here, and I would like to share a few teaching resources that we've collected. Just do a quick overview of those, and then with the minute or two we have at the end, we can see if there are any other wrap-up questions or anything that you'd like to add. So let me quickly run through a few of these learning opportunities. A couple of teachers have asked questions along these lines as well, and I think it's a good time to add these. So to start off, I shared here the link to our primary source resource guide on ancient and traditional China.
Mm-hmm.
We also have a strong modern China resource guide along with 60 or so other topical resource guides for K through 12 teachers. And there's a simple free registration procedure you should go through to access the full collection. I really recommend that you do that, and these are freely available to you. These resource guides created by Primary Source are different from the many university-based bibliographies which strive to be comprehensive and scholarly, and we highlight the most helpful, still based on strong scholarship, but the most helpful, relevant, student-friendly resources that are widely available to the teaching community. You navigate our resource guides using the tabs at the top, and those tabs are a little bit different on each guide. This one you'll see has a section for elementary and middle school Chinese literature, film suggestions, websites, lessons and curriculum, where there's a lot of material relevant to the Mongols. And the next source that this is one that we highlight, one of the best sources that we highlight on our guide is this one, and it's from Asia for Educators out of Columbia University, and it's an excellent project, and it was spearheaded by none other than Morris Rosabi. So it's an extensive website on Mongol history in the context of world history, and some of our participants tonight were asking for some classroom usable resources, and this would be the first place that I would go to look for such materials here, images, readings, primary documents, and so forth. This is a really, really terrific source. We have next some books and films, and those you too would find on the resource guide. I'm curious to ask you, Morris, if you are a fan of Jack Weatherford's books. He's introduced.
I'm not a fan.
Not a fan. Okay.
I think he's one of the people who has vulgarized the history.
Popularized. Okay. All right. Well,
popularized is okay, but yeah. Vulgarized is not.
Vulgarized is not. Okay. Good to know. Good to know. And there are some films too. Were you familiar with? Did you see the movie Mongol that came out in 2007?
Yes, I did.
And what do you think?
So.
Okay, I should.
There is a very good film that I would recommend very, very highly, and that's a film put out by the BBC.
Okay.
And it's called it's a 4 hours. You can choose, one of them, and they're very good. They're very authentic, and they're beautifully done.
Oh, good. We have that on the resource guide as well. That's great to know. I like and call your attention to the Annenberg Learner Bridging World History collection, and Unit 11 includes the Mongol Empire in a comparison of 3 contemporary empires, Mali and the Inca, and that's teacher PD, sort of self-guided professional development that you might like to take a look at. And last but not least is the wonderful World History for Us All. This is an incredibly ambitious, entirely free online curriculum that's really meant to, I think, to revolutionize the way that world history is taught in many regards. It was created by a powerhouse team out of the National Center for History in the Schools at UCLA and San Diego State University, and the scholar most responsible for this project is Ross Dunn. And Ross, who is on the line with us tonight, I think will be our presenter for webinar 2 3 weeks from now, when he reintroduces us to the incomparable Ibn Battuta. So that's a good segue for us to begin to wrap up. And before we go tonight, Morris, I just wanted to give you a chance to say a word about your NEH grant. Is that coming up next summer?
Thank you very much. Yeah, we just received word that I'll be director of an institute on the Mongols and global history at the University of Pennsylvania for 4 weeks, starting July 16th, and it'll be for secondary school teachers. We will have you have a stipend, for transport, for living, housing, and so on at the University of Pennsylvania. And we have an outstanding group of lecturers, people from Smithsonian Institution, Yale, Penn, who are really were chosen because they're able to convey the glory of them and sometimes the not so glorious aspect of the Mongols. That'll be available on the NEH website starting on November 1st. You can apply, or if you want more information, you can write me as well.
Oh, that's an incredible opportunity for teachers, and I know that many people that we work with will be very excited to apply for that. I want, as we close out, to remind you that there are many ways to keep in touch with Primary Source, and I hope you'll do so. This slide describes our social media presence and the ways that you can follow our work. I want to thank all of our participants this evening for joining us, as well as those who listen to the webinar after it's recorded, and we'll be emailing our group again later this week with more details and the recording link itself. Professor Rosabi, it was really a joy to work with you, and your presentation was riveting. It was so interesting. Thank you very much. Everything we could have hoped for. I hope you enjoyed doing it.
I loved it. I enjoyed it very much indeed.
Good. We'll have to do it again
on
a different topic. Thank you again so much. Good night, everyone. Have a nice evening, and we'll see you soon.
Good night.
Good night.